Welcome to another video of Apigia History Videos. In this video, I want to talk about the events leading up to the American Revolutionary War. Next video, we'll actually talk about, the battles and the war heroes. But in this video, I only want to talk about the events leading up to the war. So, the first of the 7 Years' War, and it's also known as the French and Indian War in the United States because we, as the United States, we were part of Britain, and we were fighting the French and the Indian on one side, right? But everywhere else, it's just known as the 7 Years' War. It ended in 1763, right? So let's see what actually happened in the war. So Britain was fighting the Native Americans for land, but that land was actually controlled by France. But France had very friendly terms with the Native Americans because they fur traded with them and also traded other goods. So that land was actually controlled by the French, but it was actually settled by Native Americans, and they were fighting for that land. That's why it's French and Indian. So there's French and Indian on one side versus Britain and the colonies, right, which is the United States. The United States was a colony of Britain at the time and fought for the British, right? The British won the 7 Years' War and got all the French territories. Let's go to the next slide. This pink area right here, that is the new French territory that they conquered. And this dark red area right here, and that's what they already had. Those are the 13 colonies. They conquered all this new pink area, which is the French land, and the Indians lived here. Right here. Okay, let's go back up. But then when they conquered it and people wanted to settle it, there were multiple Native American revolts. They're like, no, we want to stay in our own land. So to avoid all this violence and all these Native American revolts, the King George III, made the Proclamation of 1763, which outlawed anybody to settle beyond the Appalachian Mountains. So see, the Appalachian Mountains are right here. This one right here, boom, 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 boom. And that's exactly where the proclamation line of 1763 was drawn. So in technical terms, what King George was saying is that we conquered all this new land for you, but you can't settle it. Because they conquered all this, whoops, let's go back up. They conquered all this new pink territory. It wasn't colored pink, but that's how it is in the map. And then they went there to settle. There were Native American revolts. They didn't want to deal with that violence, so they drew this proclamation line of 1763, outlawing anyone to settle beyond that line. So they conquered a lot of land, but they didn't allow anyone to settle there. So the colonists weren't too happy about this. Okay, so now we get to the Stamp Act. So to pay the money for the 7 Years' War, right, Britain had to send all their troops, right, and that costs money. They put taxes on printed items, and these taxes only applied in the colonies, right? The way Britain saw this is we fought for the colonies to get extra land for our colony, right, the United States, so now the colonies have to pay us money, right? And so these printed items were marked with stamps to indicate that they were taxed, and the colonists did not like this at all. And they made a slogan, no taxation without representation. This is because they had no representation in the parliament, and then the parliament was taxing them, so they made this slogan, no taxation without representation. And then there was the Sugar Act, which is basically tax sugar and molasses, and this was only to the colonists, which is basically the United States colony. The Boston Massacre. So on March 5th, 1770, a scuffle broke out between British troops and colonists, and then the British troops opened fire with their muskets, and they killed 5 people and injured 6 more. The colonists threw snowballs with rocks inside at the British soldiers, and one important person that died in the Boston Massacre was Crispus Attucks, African American who was the first casualty of the American Revolutionary War. He was unknown whether he was a slave or a free man, but he's widely considered the first casualty of the American Revolutionary War. So that's the Boston Massacre. So again, tensions are rising. They had the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, and now they killed 5 people. Okay, now they go even further. They taxed the colonists on tea. Okay, now Samuel Adams and the Sons of Liberty. The Sons of Liberty were basically a group they were fighting for United States freedom. They dressed up as Mohawk Indians and went to the tea ships, the cargo ships in the Boston Harbor, and dumped dumped enormous amounts of tea into the water from the ships. They took the crates and they dumped them into the water, and they destroyed a large amount of tea. This was called the Boston Tea Party, and it took place on May 10th, 1773. Okay, and so after the Boston Tea Party, the British Parliament was extremely mad, right? They were like, "You destroyed so much tea, you cost us so much money." So they passed the Intolerable Acts, also known as the Coercive Acts. Okay, and so now this was in response to the Boston Tea Party. It was a sort of punishment for the colonists. The colonists had to pay for all the tea lost, and also until they did that, the Boston harbor was blockaded. So until they didn't pay for all the tea lost, which was an enormous amount of money, the Boston harbor was blockaded. And then also there was a quartering act in one of these intolerable acts, which was passed, making it a law that American colonists had to host a British soldier in their houses if requested. So if a British soldier came up to your house, knocked on the door, and said, "I want to stay here for the night," you had to do it. So this was obviously intolerable. So that's where our story ends today. And now this is how American colonists got so mad they started forming militias, and that's how the American Revolutionary War began. We'll cover more about the American Revolutionary War in the next video. Thanks for watching. This is Apiga Sudani signing out.